I was halfway through waxing down my old fishing boat when I heard the dreaded heels clicking on concrete. I didn't even have to look up. That sharp, nasal voice cut through the lakeside breeze like a rusty blade. "Zayden Voss, what do you think you're doing? You can't just leave that thing tied to the dock." I glanced up, still holding the rag in one hand. There she stood, Margella Whitmore, president of the Maple Hollow HOA. Mid-50s, permanently annoyed, with a white visor perched like a crown of entitlement on her over-bleached hair. She looked like she was born with a clipboard in her hand. "This thing happens to be my boat, Margella," I said, standing up straight, "and that dock, it's mine, along with the lake." She scoffed so hard I thought she'd rupture something. "You're joking." "Nope." Deed and all. I reached into the back pocket of my cargo shorts and pulled out a laminated copy of the property survey. I'd kept copies ever since the HOA tried to fine me for building the dock last year. See that line? Everything inside it, including the shoreline and dock, is privately owned. By me? Margella snatched the paper like it was a piece of contraband. "This can't be right. Maple Hollow has community lake access. That boat is an eyesore. Community access is over by the trailhead." I pointed across the water. "This part, not yours, not the HOA's, mine." She didn't like that. Her face went red as a crab boil. "As president of the HOA, I'm telling you to remove it immediately." I leaned against the railing. "You can tell me anything you want, but unless you've got a court order or a badge, I'm not moving a damn thing." Her jaw dropped. "You're being hostile." "No," I said, "I'm being legal. There's a difference." She stormed off, muttering something about violations and board meetings. I watched her go, then turned back to my boat and kept waxing. But I should have known. Margella wasn't the type to give up after being told no. And the next morning, the real storm hit. I woke to the sound of wet gravel crunching under tires, a low, deliberate roll that didn't match the usual early morning joggers or dog walkers. I pulled the curtain back and spotted a black SUV idling at the edge of my driveway, engine humming, windows tinted darker than legal. It sat there for a full minute before backing up and disappearing down Lakefront Drive. I didn't recognize it. It wasn't from around here. By the time I stepped out with my coffee, there were 3 bright orange notices stapled to the trees near my dock, each one stamped with the Maple Hollow HOA logo. Unauthorized structure, environmental violation, pending removal. The wording was vague, almost intentionally so, and each notice had a different signature at the bottom. Not just Margella's, 2 others I didn't know. I peeled them off, stuffed them into my toolbox, and made my way to the county records office by lunch. The clerk, a guy named Rick I'd met during the dock permit process, glanced at the notices and raised an eyebrow. "These aren't legitimate," he said, flipping through the files. "We don't issue environmental citations through HOAs, and your dock's already been cleared by the county inspector last year. Everything's on file." "So if they're not legal," I asked, "what happens if they try to act on them?" He looked over his glasses. "If they tamper with private property?" "That's criminal mischief, maybe trespassing. If they bring in contractors to remove the dock, they're facing felony charges." I left with copies of my permits, property lines, and the inspector's signed approval. I also stopped by the sheriff's office to log a formal complaint. Sheriff Blanton, a broad-shouldered Vietnam vet with a habit of chewing mint toothpicks, gave me a slow nod after reading the notices. "Don't let anyone near that dock without filming it," he said. "If they cross the property line again, we'll take it from there." By the time I got home, the black SUV was back, parked farther down the road this time, half concealed behind a row of azaleas. I walked straight toward it with my phone recording. The engine revved and it pulled away without hesitation. That night, I installed 2 trail cameras, one facing the dock, the other pointed toward the road. They were motion-activated, infrared, and tucked discreetly into the brush. I didn't mention them to anyone. The next morning, I found fresh tire tracks leading down the side path near the lake. Someone had driven onto my grass and left deep ruts. My mailbox had been knocked sideways and the flag snapped clean off. I checked the footage. Around 2:30 in the morning, a figure in a hoodie had crept along the tree line, yanked one of the orange notices out of my trash bin, and nailed it back onto a post by the dock with a different signature. Then headlights flared as the black SUV rolled down my side yard, circled and sped off, kicking up mud and turf. I isolated the license plate. The vehicle belonged to a landscaping company based 3 towns over. I called them. The owner, a wiry guy named Hugo, answered after a few rings. I explained the situation and his tone shifted immediately. "Wait, are you saying someone's using our truck?" he asked. "We haven't had a crew out there. That vehicle's supposed to be in our lot at night." He checked his GPS logs while I waited. "It was taken," he muttered. "I've got logs showing it left the yard at 1:30 a.m. without authorization. It's supposed to be locked behind the gate." "You might want to file a police report," I said. "I've got video." By the end of the day, the sheriff's office had launched a formal investigation. My footage, combined with Hugo's GPS logs, pointed to someone with access to the landscaping company's keys and vehicles. That's when things got stranger. The following week, I noticed a series of digital messages posted on the Maple Hollow HOA's internal network. A neighbor named Dana, who had helped fix a retaining wall last spring, sent screenshots anonymously. The posts claimed I was blocking community lake access, endangering wildlife, and erecting unauthorized barriers. There were even fake images doctored to make it look like I'd fenced off part of the shoreline with barbed wire. The comments below were a storm of fury. Neighbors I'd never met calling for my removal from the community, demanding the dock be demolished, even suggesting I be fined into submission. But the kicker was the post from an account labeled Admin MW. It read, "We are currently pursuing legal avenues to reclaim access to the lakefront. The homeowner has refused to cooperate and may be in violation of Section 8.4 of the Maple Hollow Covenant." Dana managed to pull the metadata from the post. It had been uploaded from an IP address registered to none other than Margella Whitmore's home. I brought the digital evidence to the sheriff and filed a second report, this time for defamation, cyber harassment, and property damage. I also hired a local attorney, Rosalie Chen, who specialized in real estate and HOA abuse cases. She looked over my files, the video footage, and the HOA bylaws. "Section 8.4 doesn't apply to your parcel," she said, flipping through the covenant. "That clause only governs shared amenities owned by the HOA. You're not part of their controlled lakefront zone. Can we get an injunction?" I asked. "Oh, we can do better than that," she said. "We're going to file a cease and desist against the HOA board, launch a civil suit for damages, and demand a forensic audit of their finances. If they're willing to fabricate documents and impersonate municipal authority, there's no telling what else they've done." By the end of the week, subpoenas had been filed. The sheriff's office pulled security footage from the landscaping company's lot and confirmed that someone had used a spare key from the office drawer, one only 3 people had access to. One of them was Margella's nephew, a part-time contractor who'd worked for the company during off-season months. The pieces were falling into place. At the next Maple Hollow HOA meeting, which I attended with Rosalie and my evidence-packed binder, Margella stood at the podium acting like the queen of decency and order. She launched into a tirade about irresponsible homeowners endangering the neighborhood's integrity. She didn't know I had already submitted the cease and desist order to the board's legal counsel. Rosalie stood up calmly, adjusted her glasses, and asked for the floor. "Before we move forward with this meeting, I'd like to present video and photographic evidence of criminal actions taken against my client's property," she said, projecting the footage of the black SUV onto the community center's overhead screen. "Additionally, we have documentation proving that false information was uploaded to the HOA's website from President Whitmore's home network." The room went dead silent. One of the board members, a man in his 60s who'd mostly kept to himself, stood up mid-presentation and walked out without a word. Rosalie continued, laying out the timeline, the fabricated citations, the forged signatures, and the illegal surveillance attempt. She passed out copies of the legal complaint to every board member and let them know that any further interference with my property would be treated as criminal conspiracy. Margella tried to interrupt, but Rosalie didn't even look at her. "You'll have your chance to respond in court," she said. And just like that, the meeting adjourned early. Half the room avoided eye contact on the way out. The other half whispered to each other, clearly stunned. I walked home that night under a sky thick with stars, the lake calm and undisturbed. The dock lights reflected off the water like nothing had ever happened, but now, the entire neighborhood knew what had been going on behind the scenes, and I had no intention of letting Margella or her cronies disappear quietly into the shadows. 2 weeks passed and Margella had gone silent, at least in public. No more notices showed up. No late-night tire tracks, no anonymous posts on the HOA network. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was quiet. Too quiet. I kept my cameras running. Sheriff Blanton's advice had stuck with me, and I wasn't about to let my guard down. Rosalie was already preparing to request discovery documents from the HOA board, and the court had scheduled the first hearing for early spring. The board, under pressure, had hired a law firm from the next county over big on image but light on substance. Then, out of nowhere, Dana called. She never used to before all this. Her voice was low and fast, like she didn't want to be overheard. "You need to see what I found," she said, not giving me a chance to reply before hanging up. I met her an hour later at a strip mall cafe 2 towns over. She was already at a booth in the back, tapping her nails against a manila folder. "I didn't know what I'd find when I started digging," she said, sliding it across the table. "But it's bad." Inside were copies of internal HOA meeting minutes, ones that had never been publicly posted. Some were handwritten, others typed but never uploaded. Several of the documents contained references to restructuring the lakefront zone, reallocating easements, and reclaiming private shoreline for future enhancement projects. It wasn't just talk. There were drafts of rezoning requests addressed to the County Planning Commission. None were stamped or submitted, but they all listed my parcel by number as a target for community access expansion. "How'd you get these?" I asked. "I work in records," she said. "HOA board members sometimes forget where they leave things, especially when they're in a hurry." My stomach turned. If they'd gone through with these plans, they could have tried to force an easement through my property, maybe even claimed eminent domain through legal loopholes. It would have taken years to fight and cost a fortune. "They never submitted these," I muttered, flipping through the pages. "But they were planning to." "Not just planning," she said. "I heard from my cousin, he works at the county zoning office. Someone tried to file one of those forms last month. It was rejected because the parcel was marked as privately owned without HOA oversight." I stared at the date on the draft. It matched the same morning I found the third bogus violation nailed to the post. So they'd already made a move and failed. I thanked her, slid the folder into my backpack, and drove straight to Rosalie's office. She was meeting with a paralegal when I arrived, but the moment she saw the documents, everything else stopped. "This changes the scope completely," she said, scanning the drafts. "You're not just dealing with harassment. This is attempted land seizure under false pretenses." She picked up her phone and made 2 calls, first to the county zoning commissioner, then to the assistant district attorney. By the end of the day, a formal investigation had been opened into the Maple Hollow HOA board for attempted fraud and unlawful use of zoning documents. The ADA assigned to the case, a sharp-eyed woman named Elise Rivera, immediately requested every communication the HOA board had exchanged over the past 6 months. 3 days later, someone broke into the HOA's storage unit. It was supposed to be locked and only accessible to board members, but the latch had been pried open. Inside, Several boxes were missing, including financial ledgers, meeting tapes, and archived member complaints. Sheriff Blanton called me the next morning. "We think someone's trying to cover their tracks," he said. "The unit wasn't insured and the security camera outside hadn't been working for weeks." "Let me guess," I said. "Maintenance request filed but never completed." "You got it." Rosalie filed an emergency petition to freeze the HOA's accounts and secure all remaining records. The judge granted it within 24 hours. A forensic auditor was assigned to comb through the digital logs, bank statements, and emails. What he found turned everything on its head. Over the past 3 years, nearly $80,000 had been funneled into a beautification fund that didn't exist in any official budget. Most of the transactions were small, just under the threshold that required board approval. But they all led back to a single account registered to a shell nonprofit, Friends of Maple Hollow Waterside. The account holder? Margella Whitmore. I was sitting at my kitchen table when the news broke. Sheriff deputies served a warrant at her house just after sunrise. She was escorted out in a beige robe, still clutching her phone, while 2 officers carried out boxes of documents and electronics. The HOA board scrambled. 3 members resigned within 48 hours. One of them, the same man who'd walked out of the meeting weeks earlier, signed an affidavit confirming that Margella had been orchestrating the lakefront reclamation project under false pretenses. She had convinced the board it was legal and beneficial to the neighborhood, but had never disclosed her financial interest. Apparently, she planned to sell community access rights to a private paddleboard company she had a stake in. The contract had already been drafted. All she needed was a sliver of my shoreline to close the deal. But she hadn't counted on me owning the land outright or being willing to fight. The district attorney charged her with wire fraud, falsification of public documents, and conspiracy to commit zoning fraud. More charges were pending based on the financial audit. I didn't attend the arraignment, but Blanton told me afterward that she tried to pin everything on rogue board members and miscommunications. The judge didn't buy it. She was released on bond, but her travel was restricted and her assets were frozen. Rosalie filed an updated civil suit against the HOA, now under temporary management by a court-appointed trustee. The suit demanded full restitution for attempted land seizure, reputational damage, and legal costs. She also filed a petition to dissolve the HOA's authority over non-common parcels, meaning anyone with private property not governed by shared amenities could opt out permanently. The new trustee didn't fight it. He said it was the only way to salvage what little public trust remained. When the ruling came down, the court granted every request. The HOA lost jurisdiction over my property entirely. Their bylaws were revised to prohibit any future zoning initiatives without unanimous member approval. And a new oversight committee made up solely of non-board homeowners was created to monitor finances moving forward. A few weeks later, I walked down to the dock with a cold cider in hand and finally dropped the anchor on my boat. Not because I had to move it, but because I didn't. The lake was glassy and still, reflecting the last light of sunset. A blue heron flapped across the far end, unbothered by the chaos that had unfolded. Dana joined me not long after, carrying a small cooler and 2 folding chairs. "Guess you finally won," she said, setting one down. "Didn't feel like winning," I admitted. "Felt like surviving," she nodded. "But now everyone knows. No one's going to try anything again, not after this." I believed her, not because of fear, but because of change. The neighborhood had seen how far someone in power could go when unchecked, and how far someone without power could push back when armed with the truth. As the sky turned dark and the lake disappeared into shadow, I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence settle around us. For the first time since the first knock of Margella's heels, I didn't feel like I had to be on alert. The lake was mine. The dock was mine, and now the peace was too. 3 months after the court stripped Maple Hollow HOA of its authority over my property, The neighborhood had settled into a sort of cautious calm. The board had been gutted, the trustee was quietly restructuring the mess, and Margella's trial was still pending. I thought maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind me. Then I got a letter, not certified, not from the court, just a plain envelope shoved into my mailbox without postage. No return address. Inside was a single page typed, no signature. It read, "Enjoy your dock while you can. We haven't forgotten what you did." I folded it once, slid it into a folder labeled Unresolved Incidents, and called Sheriff Blanton. "Same formatting as the last 2 anonymous hits we found on other cases," he said after I scanned it over. "Whoever wrote that isn't done yet." "I'll flag it." I kept my expression neutral, but my gut twisted. I hadn't made enemies, I'd exposed corruption, but people like Margella didn't act alone. They needed accomplices, ones who hadn't been caught yet. And this letter told me someone still had skin in the game. A week later, I learned who. Elise Rivera, the ADA assigned to the HOA investigation, called me into her office. Her tone was clipped and her face unreadable as she handed me a sealed packet. Inside were transaction records that hadn't been part of the original audit. They showed payments from the HOA's general fund to a private security firm, one registered to a man named Curtis in Dry. Curtis wasn't on any board. He wasn't listed as a contractor, but I knew the name. I'd seen it once, months back, scribbled on a clipboard Margella had left on her porch. He was her off-the-books guy, the one she called when she didn't want a paper trail. Curtis ran surveillance for the board, Elise said. Mostly under the radar, cameras on properties without consent, monitoring homeowners who'd filed complaints. "We've got 4 affidavits from residents who say they saw him lurking near their homes." I leaned forward. "Was he the one in the black SUV? We're working on that, but there's more." She flipped to the next page. 2 nights ago, someone broke into the trustee's office. Nothing was stolen, but drawers were rifled through. No forced entry. We checked the logs. Curtis's name is on the visitor list from earlier that day. He claimed he was there to drop off a landscaping invoice. Elise closed the folder. "I need you to stay alert. If he contacts you, don't engage." "Call us." I didn't nod. I didn't agree. I just stood, took the packet, and walked out. Because I already knew I wouldn't wait around. If Curtis was still playing games, I was going to find out what he wanted and why. That evening, I cleaned the lenses on my trail cameras, replaced the batteries, and added a 3rd one directly under my dock's main beam. Then I sat in the boathouse with a thermos and a set of live feeds running on my tablet. At 2:47 in the morning, someone stepped into frame. He wore a ball cap, hoodie, and cargo pants. He crouched near the shoreline, pulled a small device from his bag, and began unscrewing one of the dock's support brackets. I zoomed in. His face turned briefly toward the camera, just enough to confirm it. "Curtis," I called Blanton directly. By the time the cruiser pulled up, Curtis was halfway through removing the 2nd bracket. I stayed hidden until the deputy stepped out with a flashlight and ordered him to freeze. Curtis bolted. He didn't get far. A 2nd unit had come around from the trailhead. They tackled him near the edge of the neighbor's retaining wall and cuffed him with minimal fuss. I stepped out slowly as they hauled him toward the car. "Thought you were landscaping," I said. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the ground, breathing heavy. Blanton arrived 10 minutes later. He took one look at the tools Curtis had dropped and whistled. "These aren't for repairs," he said. "That's a hydraulic wedge." He was trying to collapse the dock from underneath. Curtis was booked for attempted property destruction, trespassing, and violation of a protective order. But it didn't stop there. During the search of his truck, deputies found a flash drive. On it were hours of covert footage, dozens of files labeled by address, date, and homeowner name. Some were just surveillance. Others had audio conversations, arguments, even intimate moments. He'd been spying on at least 7 households, and worst of all, there was a folder labeled Project Driftwood. Inside were blueprints, altered site plans for my property, showing a rerouted shoreline and new community access footpath. The documents were backdated to look official and included forged signatures from a defunct zoning subcommittee. The idea wasn't just to harass me. It was to fake a paper trail that supported the HOA's claim to my land, then destroy the dock before I could challenge it. Rivera moved fast. She filed new charges against Curtis for conspiracy and unlawful surveillance. Then she filed a motion to reopen the investigation into the remaining former board members, especially those who had yet to speak on the record. One of them cracked. Her name was Joanne Leaney. She'd been on the board for 6 years, mostly handling newsletters and event planning. But under questioning, she admitted she'd been present at a meeting where Margella and 2 others openly discussed removing Zayden's dock by any means necessary. She provided recordings, quiet audio files she'd kept on her phone out of fear. One clip caught Margella saying, "If we can't get him to move it, we'll make it disappear. I'll have Curtis take care of it." It was enough. The DA filed indictments against 2 more former board members for conspiracy, fraud, and tampering with public records. Curtis accepted a plea deal in exchange for full disclosure. He agreed to testify and surrendered all remaining surveillance equipment. He also admitted to being the one who delivered the threatening note. The trial against Margella began midsummer. I sat in the second row, flanked by Dana and a few neighbors who'd quietly supported me through the chaos. The courtroom was cold, the air tense. Rivera laid out the timeline, the forged documents, the surveillance, all of it tied back to Margella's obsession with controlling the lakefront. Margella's defense was weak. She claimed she'd been misled by Curtis, pressured by fellow board members, and had no knowledge of the forged site plans. Joanne's testimony destroyed that position. So did the recordings. The jury deliberated for 5 hours, guilty. The judge sentenced Margella to 4 years in a state facility with the possibility of parole after 2. Curtis received 18 months and probation. The other 2 board members received suspended sentences and community service. I didn't cheer. I didn't celebrate. I just walked out of the courthouse into the sharp autumn air and let my shoulders finally drop. The new trustee, a soft-spoken woman named Eliza Hart, called a community meeting a week later. It was the first HOA gathering I'd attended where no one brought a clipboard. Eliza stood at the podium, cleared her throat, and spoke plainly. There will be no further attempts to expand community access without full public review. All security practices will be done transparently. And any homeowner may opt out of HOA jurisdiction if their property falls outside shared zones. Then she looked directly at me. "And Mr. Voss, on behalf of this neighborhood, I want to apologize. You were right to stand your ground, and we're better for it." I nodded once. That was enough. That fall, I rebuilt the dock's railing and added a new brass plaque to the end post. It read simply, "Private property protected by truth." Neighbors started stopping by more often, not to complain, but to ask questions, share stories, even fish off the edge with me. Kids played at the shoreline. Dana brought her brother's canoe one Saturday, and we pushed off just after sunrise, the lake still and golden. The cameras came down. The folder labeled "Unresolved Incidents" went into the cabinet. And for the first time in a year, I opened my front door, stepped out onto the porch, and didn't glance over my shoulder. The HOA had tried to take what wasn't theirs. But I had something they didn't: the law, the truth, and the will to fight, and that made all the difference.